Deep in the heart of Blackwater Swamp, legend tells of the Boghorn horror, a creature that should never have existed. Once a man, Jeremiah Crane, was cursed by a vengeful witch, his flesh melting into the muck, his bones warping into roots. He became part of the swamp, his hollow eyes glowing from the reeds, his breath forming mist that leads travelers astray. Those who hear his wet, gurgling whispers rarely return, and those who do, come back changed, their bodies oozing sludge, their voices no longer human. The swamp had always been a place of secrets. Shadows stretched too long beneath the cypress trees, and the water never stayed still, even when the wind was dead. No one in Blackwater dared venture too deep, especially after dark. The whispers were always there, wet, gurgling things that slithered just beneath the surface. But one night, William Tully didn't listen to the warnings. He was a man of science, a professor from the city who laughed at the old swamp legends. Superstition, he muttered, setting out in his rowboat, lantern flickering. He was looking for evidence, proof that Jeremiah Crane, the man who had become the Boghorn horror, was just a folk tale. As he paddled deeper into the murky expanse, the air thickened, heavy with the scent of rot. The trees leaned over the water, their roots like grasping fingers. And then, the whispers began. Turn back. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice. A voice that came from the water itself. William froze, gripping his lantern tighter. His breath came in short gasps, mist swirling around his boat. Something moved beneath the surface, slow, deliberate. Bubbles broke the water in an eerie rhythm, like something was breathing just beneath. Then, the reeds parted. A figure rose from the black muck, its form shifting, dripping with decay. Its face was barely human, stretched and warped, its skin covered in pulsing roots and rotting moss. Empty sockets stared from where eyes should have been, glowing faintly with sickly green light. Jeremiah Crane had come. William tried to row, but the water had thickened, turning to sludge beneath him. The air was alive with whispers now, voices overlapping, rising in intensity. Hence dozens of them began to rise from the water, grasping, clawing. Stay with us. The last thing William saw before the swamp swallowed him was the Boghorn horror's mouth, opening far too wide, revealing an abyss of writhing things. The next morning, the town found his boat washed up at the shore. Empty. But the mud was covered in strange tracks, long, dragging marks that led back into the depths of Blackwater Swamp. That night, the whispers in the swamp grew louder. And somewhere, deep in the reeds, another voice joined them. The town of Blackwater knew better than to ask too many questions. When someone disappeared into the swamp, they simply muttered a prayer, locked their doors, and stayed far from the water's edge. But not everyone feared the old stories. Henry Tully, William's younger brother, had never believed in ghosts or curses. He was a hunter, a man who put trust in steel and gunpowder, not whispers in the dark. When word spread that William was missing, Henry didn't hesitate. Superstitious fools, he muttered, loading his rifle. He's out there, alive or dead, and I'm gonna bring him home. Night had already fallen by the time he reached the swamp. The air was thick, humid, and carried a foul stench like rotting vegetation mixed with something worse. The trees loomed overhead, their gnarled branches twisting like skeletal hands. Henry lit a lantern and stepped into the marsh, mud sucking at his boots. His brother's abandoned rowboat lay half-submerged near the shore, its wooden frame scratched deep with something that looked suspiciously like claw marks. Something moved in the reeds. A slithering, shifting sound. Henry gripped his rifle. William. Silence. Then, a whisper. Low. Wet. Turn back. Henry's breath hitched. He swung the lantern toward the sound, but the fog had thickened, swallowing the light. The whispering didn't stop. It was all around him now, voices overlapping, some sobbing, others laughing, but none of them sounded human. And then, he saw something. A shape in the mist. Tall. Unmoving. Watching. Henry raised his rifle. "Show yourself." The figure took a step forward, and Henry nearly dropped the lantern. It was William. Or at least, something that had once been him. His clothes were soaked in black sludge, his skin was gray and sagging, covered in pulsing, root-like veins. His eyes, once sharp and intelligent, glowed dimly, filled with something hollow. His lips parted, and a voice that was no longer his own gurgled out, "He's waiting for you, Henry." The swamp behind William stirred. The water rippled outward as something massive rose from the depths. It was Jeremiah Crane, or what was left of him. His body was a grotesque fusion of mud, bone, and twisted roots, his hollow sockets burning with an unearthly light. His mouth, far too wide, far too deep, gaped open, and from its depths, the whispering grew deafening. Henry fired. The gunshot echoed through the swamp, but Crane didn't flinch. Instead, his long, rotting fingers lifted, and the water around Henry churned. Hands burst from the swamp, rotting, grasping, pulling. Henry screamed, dropping his rifle as they dragged him downward, the mud filling his mouth, his lungs. The last thing he saw was William's face, watching blankly, as if waiting for Henry to understand. And then nothing. The next morning, the townsfolk found 2 sets of footprints leading into the swamp. Neither came back. But now, when the mist rolls over the water, people swear they hear 2 new voices whispering. And sometimes, if you stand too close to the water's edge, you might hear your own name. Days passed, and the town of Blackwater grew restless. First William. Then Henry. Both gone without a trace. The whispers in the swamp had grown louder, and the mist lingered longer than before. Some of the elders murmured about Jeremiah Crane's curse, about how it was never satisfied. "The swamp's waking up again," old Martha muttered, rocking on her porch. "It's hungry." But Sheriff Eli Carter wasn't one for ghost stories. A hardened man with a past full of bloodshed, he had spent years hunting outlaws across the bayous. Now, he had a different hunt. "I don't care what folks say," Eli told his deputy, Thomas Grady. "We're bringing those boys home." With lanterns, rifles, and a worn-out map of the swamp, they set out at sundown. As they rode deeper, the night air thickened, buzzing with the hum of unseen insects. The water, dark as ink, sloshed softly beneath their boat. Then came the whispers. Eli's grip tightened on his shotgun. "You hear that?" Thomas swallowed hard. "Yeah. I don't like it." The voices slithered between the reeds, soft and urgent, like they were speaking just behind their ears. "Turn back. He's waiting. So hungry." Thomas nearly dropped his lantern when the boat jolted to a sudden stop. "What the hell?" Eli peered over the side. Thick, black roots had risen from the water, tangling around the hull like fingers. The swamp didn't want them to leave. A splash sounded behind them. Thomas turned only to freeze. Someone was standing in the water. It was Henry. Or something wearing Henry's body. His skin was bloated and gray, his lips cracked, black water dripping from his mouth. But his eyes were the worst part. Empty, glowing faintly, filled with something ancient. "Something wrong." "Henry." Thomas whispered. Henry's head twitched, and he stepped forward, the water rippling around him. "You shouldn't have come." His voice was barely human, wet, and ragged. "It's already inside you." A second figure rose from the swamp behind him. "William." And then another. And another. Dozens of figures began rising from the water, their forms half-rotted, their eyes glowing. The lost souls of Blackwater. And then, the last one emerged. A towering, bloated figure, its body made of muck, bone, and writhing roots. Jeremiah Crane. His mouth split open, revealing a chasm of blackness. A terrible voice, deep and endless, slithered from the void. "You all belong to me now." The swamp surged forward. Eli fired his shotgun, the blast tearing through Henry's chest, but there was no blood. No reaction. Henry just kept walking, the hole in his torso dripping black sludge. "Run!" Eli shouted. But Thomas was frozen, staring into the darkness of Crane's gaping maw. A single whisper slithered into his ear. "Come home." His scream was the last thing Eli heard before the swamp swallowed them both. The next morning, the sheriff's boat was found drifting along the shore, empty. And that night, as the mist rolled in, the whispering voices doubled in number. The swamp had grown. And soon, it would need to feed again. The town of Blackwater had had enough. First William. Then Henry. Then Sheriff Carter and his deputy. The swamp was taking them one by one. And now, the mist never left. It slithered between houses, clung to windows, whispered at doors. The town knew what that meant. The swamp was coming for more. Pastor Ezekiel Moore stood at the center of Blackwater's main street, Bible in one hand, shotgun in the other. "We ain't runnin' no more," he declared. "We end this tonight." The men gathered, hunters, trappers, old soldiers, even the cowards who had once trembled at the stories. They armed themselves with rifles, torches, dynamite, anything that could fight back against the thing that lurked in the mire. They marched at sundown. By the time they reached the water's edge, the swamp was waiting. The mist thickened, rolling toward them like it had a mind of its own. The whispers rose, growing from soft murmurs to agonized wails. And then, the dead stepped forward. William. Henry. The sheriff. Dozens of others, people the town had lost over the years, their bodies rotted and twisted, their eyes glowing with eerie, swamp-born light. The men hesitated. "God help us," someone muttered. But Ezekiel didn't falter. "They ain't our kin no more," he growled. "Burn them." The first torch was thrown. Flames erupted across the reeds, licking at the water's edge. Gunfire cracked the night as the townsfolk fired into the advancing dead, the bullets tearing through flesh and bone. But the horrors did not stop. Then, the ground trembled. The water churned violently as something massive began to rise from the center of the swamp. The men staggered back as a monstrous figure pulled itself from the mire. Jeremiah Crane. Or what was left of him. His body had fused with the swamp itself, a grotesque mass of rotting wood, tangled roots, and gaping, hollow faces that screamed in agony. His mouth, impossibly large, stretched open as a voice older than time itself filled the night. "You cannot stop me." The swamp surged forward. Reeds lashed out like whips, yanking men into the water. The mist thickened, swallowing others whole. The dead moved faster, their movements jerky but unstoppable. Ezekiel roared, raising his shotgun. "We end this now." A group of men rushed forward, dynamite strapped to wooden planks. They plunged them into the heart of the mire, lighting the fuses with shaking hands. And then, they ran. The explosion shattered the night. Fire erupted across the swamp, the shock waves sending mud and water flying. The monstrous form of Jeremiah Crane writhed in agony as the flames consumed him, his screams shaking the trees, rattling bones. The swamp screamed. The dead collapsed where they stood, their bodies turning to sludge. The mist began to break apart, thinning into nothingness. And then, silence. The men stood at the burning edge of the swamp, their breath ragged, their bodies covered in muck and blood. The whispers were gone. The horror had ended. Or so they thought. As the survivors walked back to town, no one noticed the faint, black roots slithering beneath the water's surface, creeping toward the untouched parts of the swamp. No one heard the final whisper on the wind. "I will return." Blackwater was never the same after that night. The swamp was quiet now. No more whispers in the mist. No more bodies pulled beneath the reeds. The fire had scorched the land, leaving behind blackened cypress trees and smoldering mud. The town breathed a sigh of relief. For the first time in years, people walked without fear. Children played near the water's edge. Fishermen returned to the shallows. Blackwater had won. Or so they believed. 1 year later, the first sign of trouble came when old Martha woke screaming. She had been bedridden for weeks, too sick to leave her home, but that night, her wailing could be heard across the town. When her neighbors burst in, they found her clawing at her own skin, shrieking about roots growing inside her. Her veins bulged, black and pulsing. Her fingernails cracked as she dug into her flesh, trying to tear something out. But by the time anyone could stop her, her eyes rolled back, and she fell still. Her mouth opened one last time. And she whispered, "He's coming." Then, she was gone. Soon, others fell ill. Fishermen found their nets tangled with strange black weeds that pulsed as if alive. Hunters returned from the woods with missing time, claiming they heard voices calling their names. Then, the missing started. The first to go was little Samuel Grady. His mother put him to bed one night, only to wake to an empty room. No sign of struggle. No open windows. Only damp footprints leading to the door. More followed: farmers, travelers, even the mayor's own wife. No bodies. No screams. Just, gone. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. The swamp had never died. It had been waiting. Ezekiel Moore knew the truth before anyone else. He stood at the edge of the blackened swamp, shotgun gripped tight, watching as the reeds swayed in a windless night. The water had darkened again, thick and sludgy, and something moved beneath the surface. Then, he heard it. A voice. Low. Familiar. "You thought fire could stop me." The swamp rippled, and Ezekiel staggered back as something rose from the water. Not Jeremiah Crane. No. This was worse. A mass of writhing roots and bones, bodies fused together, their faces twisted in silent screams. A monstrous shape that pulsed and breathed like a living thing. The town had not killed the Boghorn horror. They had fed it. Now, it was stronger. Now, it was hungry. The last thing Ezekiel saw before the swamp reached for him was the face of old Martha, her empty eyes staring from the roots, her mouth forming one final whisper, "It's time to finish what he started." And then, the swamp surged forward. Blackwater never stood a chance. By the time travelers arrived weeks later, the town was gone. The buildings stood abandoned, their doors yawning open. The streets were covered in black mud, as if something had crawled through them. And the swamp? It was bigger. Hungrier. Waiting. And if you stand at the edge on a quiet night, you might hear a whisper, calling your name. The end.